for coming. My name's Aaron Hilliard, Mushroom Wonderland. I started this YouTube channel about 4 years ago. I've been a mushroom nerd for 30 plus years. I'm the vice president of the Kitsap Peninsula Mycological Society. And yeah, we got some members here. And so we're doing a show next weekend, so it's free to everybody, Sunday, 1 to 5 p.m. And there's going to be some awesome talks. I'm going to be giving probably the same talk, and then a couple other people, Jeremy Collison, South Sea Mushrooms. Anyways, we'll get into it. I just called this a journey into Mushroom Wonderland. It's not on anything super specific. I'm going to move this little arrow cursor. There's all kinds of different facets of mycology, but one thing that always fascinated me was just like crazy facts and like mind-blowing things about mushrooms. And so I was like trying to just brainstorm for a while, like all of the crazy things that I've learned about mushrooms that just blew my mind. And I thought that I would just incorporate those all into a talk that I guess I'm calling A Journey into Mushroom Wonderland. So. I am. We got technical difficulties, so this. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Maybe I gotta point at that thing. Okay. Okay. So I'm the creator of Mushroom Wonderland. I'm from the Puget Sound Basin, Port Orchard, Washington. My channel started in 2020. Gaining a lot of subscribership. There's like 55,000 now. I'm the vice president of foraging since I was a kid. My grandma got me into mushroom foraging when I was like 8 years old. And then as a teenager, I discovered a different style of mushroom that kind of really, you know, got me obsessed with mushrooms in a different way. And then I discovered the internet just like way late to the game and realized that there was like a whole bunch more of you people that are just like me, and we all love mushrooms. So what is a mushroom? It's a fruiting body of a fungus. The fungus lives underground or inside the substrate like a log or something like that. The mushroom is just a generic word for a fruiting body, and so you can use the analogy of an apple tree and an apple that grows on it, even though that's a little bit incomplete. It sort of gives us a way to wrap our head around the idea of what a mushroom is in relation to the vegetative part of the fungi. Oh, I pointed that, yeah. So the largest organism on Earth is a fungi. You might know this fact, but it's also the oldest organism on Earth. 8,600 years old, so there's 3.5 square miles in eastern Oregon in the Blue Mountains. A variety of honey mushroom, Armillaria astoye, and what's really kind of interesting to consider is it's tough to use the word immortality when we're talking about real things, but this mushroom, there's no central part of a fungus, there's no central part of the body, so a small piece of it could get cut off and reproduce itself. And in that way, they're essentially immortal. They could just continue to grow and grow and grow. I suppose the DNA would degrade over time, and that's why they produce spores, so that they can kind of refresh their genetics as they grow. So fungi are closer to humans and animals than they are to plants. Mushrooms and humans, we breathe oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide, and we eat food where plants get their energy through photosynthesis for the most part, and fungi has its own kingdom on the tree of life there. And it wasn't that way until, I don't know, the last 40 years that it got added as its own distinct thing. It used to be in plants. Fungi digest their food outside of their body, where we digest our food inside of our body. You order a cheeseburger, you eat it, you have enzymes and chemicals in your stomach that melt it down, and then you can absorb it. But a fungi is a little bit different. So you can think of the analogy, the cheeseburger comes, and then you throw up on it, and then you stick your arm in the throw up, and it absorbs through your arm. You know, that's kind of how a fungus works. And so they're touching their environment all the time. There is no inside of a fungus, there is no outside of it really. There's no sheath on the outside. So they're constantly touching their environment. And so the idea that if you pluck a mushroom and it's going to somehow get an infection inside the fungus, is kind of a misnomer because the fungus is touching everything all the time. There is no inside, you know? So when people think that you might introduce a pathogen inside of a fungus, it's like, there is no inside. So mushrooms reproduce by spores. They're the reproductive cells of fungi, like seeds in plants. Some mushrooms can shoot their spores up to 20 inches away from the mushroom. A really cool one is like a Helvella species that might be growing right now. You can pick it up, and if you give it a little shake once every 5 minutes or so, you'll see a plume of spores actually eject out of it. They can travel on the wind. They've been found in the jet stream, traveling over 1,200 miles. So mushrooms can get around if they catch the wind. They use the help of humans and wildlife often. Each mushroom can produce over 1 billion spores every day, which is insane to think about. That they produce so many spores, and why they do that is because to land in a perfect place for them to germinate and actually create a new fungus is like so unlikely that they need to make all of these spores, right? And these are some interesting spores. This is all microscopy that I've done, looking through a microscope at these spores. This is what psilocybes spores look like, kind of ovoid shape, football shape. These ones are from an inocybe, and they look like little turtles. We call them the turtles. These ones are from Astrophora lycopordoides. The asexual spores look like stars, and they get named Astrophora for that. And these ones are another inocyboid mushroom, and they look like rocket ships. So I just thought that was really cool. The turtles and the rocket ships, really fun to look at under the microscope. This one's called Ganoderma applanatum, the artist conch, and it produces over 30 billion spores every day. And this mushroom can grow for years, and you'll see this brownish coating on all the ferns and ground cover around these mushrooms. You can write, and they get in these pancake stack formations. Sometimes people think this is an agaricon, but this one is actually just a Ganoderma applanatum. This is a picture of my daughter, my teenage daughter Jenna, and she's an artist, and she drew this with a stick, a little twig, and you can draw on the base of those, and they bruise brown. And I put that on my shelf. It was really big when we started, and then it shrunk down, and now it's retained its size, the perfect detail, but it's like a shrinky-dink thing, you know, it's kind of cool. Gender isn't really a fungal construct, so one way that we can wrap our head around it, humans have 2 genders, male and female, to recreate biologically, traditionally 2 genders. Some species of fungi can have over 36,000 different sexually compatible genders, if you will, which is hard to wrap your head around, but kind of gives you an idea of the complexity of fungi reproduction. 1 cubic inch of soil can hold 8 miles of mycelium if you laid it end to end. So mycelium, the hyphae of a mycelium is just made up of single cells just stacked one against another. So if you somehow were to be able to tear that all apart and lay it end to end, it would go a really long ways. The hyphae make up the mycelium. The mycelium is made up of tiny hyphae. These constitute the entire body of the fungus. And this is really interesting. There's a specialized organelle, it's like an organ right on the tip of the hyphae, called the Spitzenkorper. And it assists in the formation of new cell wall and membrane structures. So basically right here, this number 11, this little tip of the hyphae, as it runs through the substrate, it encounters different chemicals and things, and it immediately figures out what kind of enzymes and metabolites it needs to excrete, especially in a mycorrhizal fungi. It'll start putting out different chemicals as it goes through the substrate to break down different nutrients throughout the soil. So they consider this an actual organ, this very little tip called the Spitzenkorper. So, it's German. A mushroom is a cluster of hyphae. So these are all these little strands running through the soil, and then they push out of the substrate and they cluster together. It's the exact same material as the mycelium itself. And then they make these beautiful mushroom shapes, and then they grow, you know, limeliae, which is the gills and the spore-bearing surface. So it's all the same, and if you take a slice of a mushroom and put it under a microscope, it's a ton of just little hyphae that are all squeezed together. Mushrooms create their own air currents, which is really kind of crazy. These are Psilocybe cubensis that were grown in a sealed tank just as a test, gone fully to maturity, and you can see the swirl pattern on the cap of them all. And it's because there's a small change in temperature underneath the cap, will be 1 degree cooler than above the cap, just enough to create a little air current that carries the spores up to the top of the cap. in the hope that it can catch on a larger wind gust. But I thought it was really cool how it left these perfect spirals on a lot of them in a completely air-free environment. You know. Mushrooms regulate their own temperature. You can find frozen logs and the mushrooms will still not be frozen. You know, fruiting bodies are consistently 4 to 5 degrees cooler than their surroundings. Even as the temperature goes down, they stay cooler typically. But then when it gets to freezing, you can find oyster mushrooms growing on a frozen log and somehow they're not frozen. It's really bizarre. Mycorrhizae. So this is kind of a big word, but it's association between a fungus and a tree or a plant. And so there's two different main types. Ectomycorrhizal, which the mycelium actually just attaches to the outside of a root of a tree, and then it exchanges so that, you know, that Spitzenkorper figured out. There's a big pocket of phosphorus right here. It'll excrete a bunch of enzymes that break down that phosphorus. Now the tree can use the phosphorus, and the tree will absorb it, and in return it feeds the fungus carbon in the forms of carbohydrates like sugar and fats. And so it's this symbiotic relationship between a tree and a mushroom, and you don't need dead material in the ground. So when people say like, mushrooms just eat dead things, that's absolutely not true. This is an arbuscular mycorrhizae, and these actually grow within the cell walls, and 90% of plants and trees and everything that's growing has these kind of fungi living inside of its leaves and its stems. And so a huge amount of the fungal population is in arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that you'll never see a fruiting body form. The market economy, we like to think that humans invented supply and demand in the market economy, but 450 million years ago, mycorrhizal fungus figured this out, and they will feed nutrients into trees at the exact proportion that the tree is feeding back carbon to the fungus. And if the tree is unfairly trying to feed carbon, the mushroom will just go find another tree. And so, and if there's a big supply of phosphorus that the tree can get, the tree will pay less to the fungus. So it's really kind of interesting. And there's like all kinds of studies at the University of Amsterdam about how these trees and the fungus interact with each other. When something becomes less available, how the prices actually go up. It's pretty interesting. Some mushrooms glow in the dark. Likely to get bugs to spread their spores. There's Mycena, these little tiny white-gilled mushrooms in the Mycinaceae, and they're pretty common around here. There's one called Mycena quinaltensis that grows right around here, named after quinal. It's right out here by the coast, and that one glows in the dark pretty brightly, just the stems of it. This one, Omphalodus alludens, and it's I don't know why this picture is here. That's bizarre. I know why. Because the insect is attracted to the light, you know. And so this is the jack-o'-lantern mushroom. Because in the east, when it's dark, you can walk through the woods and see them glowing once your eyes adjust. This one is claimed to be the brightest glowing mushroom in the world, Neonothopanthus, or Panis gardenieri. This one grows in Brazil, and it was described in the 1920s, and it kind of lost to mycology until the early 2000s. And a mycologist down there was studying mushrooms in Brazil and noticed kids in the street playing with some glowing object, throwing it back and forth, and they thought it came from insects. And as he looked closer, he found it's these mushrooms that grow at the base of coconut palm trees, and they attract rove beetles because they're down here underneath all of the wind currents of the jungle. They couldn't get enough wind to get their spores going, so they developed this to get rove beetles to carry their spores on their feet around the forest. Super duper bright. They actually have used bioluminescent mushrooms in different uses for a long time. Benjamin Franklin designed the first submarine called the Turtle, and they illuminated the depth gauges on it with a glowing Armillaria honey mushroom. So. This one's just for fun. This mushroom is called Spongiforma squarepantsii. actually named after SpongeBob. So the people who named that mushroom note that the spore-bearing surface, when viewed with a scanning electron microscope, also somewhat resembles the seafloor covered with tube sponges reminiscent of Bikini Bottom, I guess. It's a twofer. But can you see the resemblance, SpongeBob? This one, Troglodomyces twitteri, named after Twitter, the social media website. This just shows the influence of the internet and mycology these days. This mushroom is like a, it infects a type of the skin of a millipede. And it was discovered on a post on Twitter. And there's actually not good lighting here, but you can see these little tiny dots on the head of this millipede. There are some people out there doing some seriously nerdy stuff, just gonna say. The bleeding bonnet, this one grows around here, Mycena hematopus, and it's really cool. If you take a sharp razor, you can slice the cap, and it actually looks like a drip of blood comes out of it. It'll heal itself up, and then you can do it the next day, and over again. Kind of an unassuming little mushroom that's often grows on rotting logs, and it's got kind of this maroon cap. So get a sharp knife with you and just start cutting all the little mushrooms you see, and you might get blood out of them. This one's known as the train wrecker. I thought this one was really interesting, the Neolentinus lipidus, and this one would infect the railroad ties and eat all of the lignin out of the railroad ties and then cause train wrecks back in the 1800s. And it was really a problem. They nicknamed it the train wrecker because of all the damage that it caused. Microsity titans. This is one of the largest mushrooms in the world. This looks big, right? Look at how big these mushrooms are. So they can get 40 inches around, weigh 20 pounds, and these grow in Mexico, and they've been discovered even in Florida, Louisiana, and they are edible. So if you find one of those, you can like feed your whole village with one mushroom. This one, Termitomyces, this is like as big as an umbrella. So these are super interesting, and there's quite a few different species of them. I actually just got back from India just a couple days ago, and they occur in India. They also occur in Africa. And what happens is the termites actually farm this fungus, and you can't find this fungus anywhere except for termite mounds. So these termites will carry the spores, and they grow. They create the substrate that the spores like, and the fungus runs through it. And then the termites eat the fungus. And then they grow these huge fruiting bodies, and some of them are just massive, and they only grow on termite mounds. And they're also edible to humans and really a sought-after culinary delight, I guess. This one, the stinkhorn, okay, this is risque fungi. Stinkhorns and phallus species, you know, they kind of take a resemblance to something kind of phallic, right? So this is a death cap. And it's actually called Amanita phalloides, which is also named after, you know, whatever. And then down here, this part's called a vulva, and it's a little bit different than on animals, but it's just weird that mycologists went that route with on quite a few different levels. Is it fungi or fungi? Pronunciation is up to you. Mushrooms are classified in scientific Latin. Latin is a dead language. There's really nobody alive still that is truly an authority on how to pronounce things. So I've heard it said that as long as you pronounce every syllable and you're confident that you've said it correctly. Common names versus scientific names, you know, we like our common names, but they can be very variable regionally. So it can cause confusion when one area says this is an oak mushroom and someone else says that it is too, but they're two different mushrooms. So that's why mycological circles like to use scientific names more. Lots of the names are based on morphological features. Back in the day, they used to name mushrooms after people, but you know, in 500 years, people are going to be like, "Who is Stunts?" You know what I mean? But if you name it after some features, then it stands true for the test of time. Yeah. So that is Latin. The earliest mushrooms, so these are like magic mushrooms. In Spain, the Selva Pascual, the cave paintings from 6,000 to 8,000 years ago depict Psilocybe hispanica. And it looks like people were using magic mushrooms and drawing them on cave walls 8,000 years ago. Roman Emperor Claudius was murdered by his wife Agrippina when she killed him with death caps, which was kind of a gruesome way to go. Otzi the Iceman, the world's oldest mummy, 5,300 years ago. They found him in the mountains of Austria. He was carrying a couple different types of mushrooms. One of them were in his belly, thought to fight off parasites, and they had that technology figured out in the Copper Age, apparently. And then he also carried the birch polypore, Fomes fomentarius, as a fire tinder, and you could put a little chunk of a spark in there and carry it for days and then restart your fire. So super invaluable in those times when it was difficult to get a fire going. Earliest cultivation, they grew wood ears in 200 to 300 BC China. These are wood ears, auricularia. They don't really grow around here, but in the Rockies and eastward, they look just like an ear. They can be really strange looking. The oak mushroom, shiitake. So taki meaning mushroom in Japanese, shi meaning oak, the oak mushroom. Chinese farmers started growing these over 800 years ago, and when they started inoculating the logs with mycelium. One thing interesting about the shiitake log is that when you want it to fruit, temperatures get a little colder, and then you smack it, and it simulates the branch falling out of the tree and hitting the forest floor, and the mushrooms know to grow once it gets smacked around a little bit. Your common button mushroom, this is called Agaricus bisporus. This is what you see in all the grocery stores. First farmed in France when a farmer discovered they grew well on manure, and then he was throwing his manure into this cave near his farm, and these mushrooms kept growing on it, so he learned how to farm them. The white button mushrooms are just a mutation of the brown ones. So the white one, the brown one, the portobello, all the exact same mushroom. Different stages of growth. The white ones were actually a genetic mistake, and it was kind of a fluke that one of them grew white, and the guy cloned it, and he continued to grow it, and it turned out people from the mycophobic region that he was in, they figured that the white mushrooms must be cleaner because they associated with death and poop and stuff like that. So he thought the white ones would be cleaner, and so still today the white ones sell the most because people just think they look cleaner or something. Oh yeah, various sizes, so they're brown, they're white, and then when they fully mature, they open up and turn into a portobello, like the amazing steaks that we had last night in here. It was so good, man. Graham Steinrunke threw down last night. That was awesome. Saprobes are the easiest to cultivate. This is an oyster mushroom. Pleurotus ostriata is probably the most common and easily cultivated, like gourmet edible that grows on wood chips. You can just take wood chips for your Traeger grill and throw some stem buds of an oyster mushroom that you bought in the grocery store, and it would have a good chance of growing. They're a lot easier to cultivate than a mycorrhizal mushroom because you need a big mature tree for the mycorrhizal mushrooms to grow. And they've been eluding people from trying to cultivate them forever. That's why chanterelles, lobster mushroom, matsutake, porcini, they all need to be wild foraged because nobody's really figured out how to farm these successfully. Mycophilic versus mycophobic. So different cultures have different relationships with fungi, like the toadstool versus good food, you know. China produces 75% more mushrooms than America at 35 million tons a year of cultivated mushrooms. But if you go to a Chinese market, they're going to have 30 different varieties of mushrooms that you can buy. And if you go to an American market, they have one variety, you know. It's getting better. Now you can see chanterelles and when they're in season and oyster mushrooms and like Safeway and stuff like that. But it hasn't been like that for long. We're a culture that's scared of mushrooms, and we smack our kids' hands when they go to touch a mushroom because we had ours smacked, you know. So education helps to enlighten mushroom safety. Poison or food, you know, known as toxic in U.S. field guides. Turbinellus floccosus, also known as the bed poopers chanterelle. They eat them in Mexico. I don't know if it's because it's a different species, maybe they cook it a lot longer, or they have tougher digestive systems, but also this one, Gyromitra esculenta, there are deaths associated by eating this mushroom raw, mainly in Europe, but when they're detoxified through a boiling process, and you don't even want to do that indoors because the gas can be so toxic. When you eat these mushrooms, it'll create what's called monomethylhydrazine, and it's a type of hydrazine that is used as a rocket fuel. It metabolizes in your stomach and really affects your nervous system and really mess you up. But in Finland, they boil them and then they eat them. I guess there's, I don't know, it seems like there's better, safer foods these days. It's tradition. Psychedelic use of mushrooms started in Central America. Gosh, this is so much to get into. I'm not even going to go off on this tangent about who Gordon Watson. He was a really famous, awesome mycologist. He traveled to Mexico to discover what the magic mushroom was. Met with a lady named Maria Sabina in a small village in Mexico. She taught him the ways of their spiritual journeys with these mushrooms. He came back, an awesome article was wrote in the Life magazine, but all these hippies flocked to Mexico, gave Americans a bad name in that town. They kind of put a black eye on psychedelic use of mushrooms, and they kind of regretted ever letting us down there. But it opened the eyes to the fact that there were probably psychedelic and psilocybe mushrooms growing in the United States, and so a team of great mycologists in the 70s started to discover a lot of species of magic mushrooms here in Washington State. But if you talk to any of the indigenous people around here, I don't know, either they're tight-lipped and they don't want to talk about their traditional culture, you know, with these mushrooms, or they just didn't use them because they were scared of them or something, or just had no interest. So these are some of the Pacific Northwest psilocybe mushrooms, the magic mushrooms that grow wild around here. It's an essential part of this talk because they're super interesting to me. But this one's Psilocybe folliculosa, a woodland psilocybe mushroom that grows just out in the forest. I find huge troops of these growing among the clear cuts where they leave all the beauty bark and stuff laying around, and they're just really cute. All of them have a dark purple brown spore print. All of these will have a gelatinous separable pellicle, so if you slowly peel the cap apart, you'll see a slimy viscid layer on top that stays intact. Folliculosas are definitely native here. Psilocybe azurescens, these grow right out here on the coast in the dune grass. They're really big and they're really, really powerful. There's debate as to whether they truly are native or not, but it seems like they must have to be, and they're really beautiful. So basically, from the Long Beach Peninsula down south through Seaside, Oregon is the hot spot. So if you ever want to go to any of those areas, walk around in the dune grass, you might find some. Psilocybe cyanescens, wavy caps, those are really popular. They grow in urban settings underneath rhododendrons, around courthouses and police stations and school buildings. These ones are Psilocybe stuntsii. They were growing everywhere in the mid-90s when I was a teenager due to a type of sod that they were laying down in all the new housing developments, and there was just carpets of these, so all of us crazy kids were running around losing our minds on Psilocybe stuntsii. And it says that these are mild in most of the literature, but I can assure you if you make tea out of a pound of them, you'll have a different experience. These ones, Psilocybe ovoidiocystidiata, these are not native, but they're growing around here now thanks to introduction or at the fault of introduction, however you want to look at that. And they're a spring-loving psilocybe, so most of these come out in the fall, but you can find ovoids or ovoidiocystidiata growing in the spring. And this one, Psilocybe semilanceata, the Liberty cap, they grow in grassy areas on the edges of meadows, old cow pastures, not on fresh cow patties, but in pretty well fertilized soil. I spent many a year searching around in the fields behind my mom's house. There was all cow pasture, and I never found a single one. I was so pissed. These are some of the local medicinal mushrooms. Just going to go through these kind of quick. We've got a lot of medicinal talks, so I don't know, but they're fascinating. I took this picture in Bremerton, Washington. This one's called Ganoderma organense. This is our local Ganoderma or reishi mushroom, been used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years. They call this the mushroom of immortality, and it has antioxidant properties that will actually slow down the aging process in things, and including humans. So I guess that's probably why they got the name the mushroom of immortality. But they grow like a kind of like E.T., you know, it looks like beat me up, Scotty, or something like that. And this they like to grow on old conifer logs. And this is an ancient stand of old growth, so I don't like picking them from this area, but they sure grow beautifully here, and they're an annual conch, so they grow once a year, and then they will die, and then new ones will come out early summer, and they mature in autumn, and they're also known as a lacquered conch because of this shiny look. The lighting in here isn't doing it justice, but it truly is, in fact, it's like the exact same chemical compound used on lacquer on furniture. So, kind of interesting. The turkey tail, Trametes versicolor, this is super common. If you're like, I wonder if this is a turkey tail, it probably is. I'm just saying. And they don't really have any poisonous look-alike, so even if you cooked up some turkey tail tea and it happened to be false turkey tail, it's not going to hurt you. But these are, you can tell what they are because of these concentric colored rings. And see, this one is kind of like tan and gray and blue, tan, gray, blue, black, you know. And they go out and they can be orange and green and all kinds of different colors. and on the underside they have a porous surface, so it'll be creamy white with little tiny pinholes all in it. And the false turkey tail or cerium is just smooth, and it's the same color as the top of the cap, as the bottom of the cap. But these are the most highly studied medicinal mushrooms in the world, mainly for their mycelium and immune boosting, cancer therapy. Paul Stamets talks about his wife, his mom recovering from breast cancer by using turkey tail therapy. So a really powerful one and easy to find in the woods around here, laying on deciduous logs like hardwood, alder, big leaf maple, some of the more common. And I've even found them on conifer, but it's not as common. This one, the bleeding tooth fungi, Hydnellum peckii, named after a famous mycologist, Charles Horton Peck, back in the 1920s. And it has anticoagulant properties, even though you wouldn't think so because it looks like it's bleeding. And me and Alan Rockefeller just made a video 2 days ago where he licks one. And I've done it myself just to see what it tastes like. And it's really spicy, but the spiciness goes away pretty quick. But a lot of people think this looks deadly, or some people think it looks delicious, but it's really neither. It's just kind of like a chunk of wood, so you can't really eat it. You can make and they use the pigmentation in fabric dyeing. So you can use protein fabrics like wool and silk. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. This one, lion's mane. This one I found in Bremerton, Washington, which is kind of rare in western Washington. These wild varieties of Hericium arenaceus can be highly medicinal, and a lot of growers want to try to capture these genetics. And so I have a chunk of that. And the interesting thing is a dried piece of mushroom can come back to life. You can keep it saved and do some Jurassic Park stuff just by setting it on some agar and it'll start to grow again. But yeah, Hericium arenaceus with these beautiful long teeth. Gorgeous mushroom, really bizarre looking. They're really good for your gut health, apparently. So, I'm not a doctor though, but that's what I heard. The alcohol inky cap, this one's kind of interesting. Copernopsis atramenteria, not really medicinal, but it's got a compound related to something that severe alcoholics would use called anabuse. And this contains something called coprine, and it has a bad reaction with alcohol. So you could be drinking alcohol right up to the point when you eat a plate of these and you'll be fine. But if you were to drink alcohol right after eating that plate of them, you'll get violently ill. And it'll last for about a week. So another interesting thing in trials in the 1970s was they found that these mushrooms and coprine caused testicular lesions on rats and on dogs. So they actually started to look into this as being a male anti-fertility type of birth control. So it didn't work out, so probably a good thing. Those guys wanted to have a couple beers too or something. Deadly, yeah, speaking of getting sick, some deadly mushrooms. These ones aren't local, they're not native to the Puget Sound, but they're here, and I find them in Tacoma. They've been found all around the UW campus, mainly growing underneath imported European hardwood trees like linden and hornbeam, and they've already started associating with some of the native trees like the live and the Gary oak. But this is Amanita phalloides, responsible for 95% of mushroom deaths, because it looks a little bit like a different Amanita that they pick in South Asia. And a lot of people think that they're looking for a species of Volvariella, but it's actually a different Amanita that's like white with greenish undertones and a vulva. It looks so much, I would never eat that mushroom, even though it's a really highly prized edible mushroom over there. They look too much like these, and I just think they're fascinating. They're one of my favorites just because they're, why do they have to be so deadly? I don't know, but one of these mushroom caps could kill a full-grown man. And there's actually an ongoing case about a woman in Australia, if you haven't heard of this, where she invited her whole ex-husband and her family over for a luncheon and made beef Wellington with personally foraged mushrooms. And she didn't happen to eat any, but the whole family, like 3 out of 4 of them died. And the other one is still, he'll probably be on dialysis for life, even with the liver transplant. And then the dehydrator from her house was found in the dump the very next day. So they're testing it for evidence of Amanita phalloides. But it's like, really? This is happening right now? Like, this is creepy, right? So follow that story. I keep checking on it. So like, did we find out yet? Like, and then shows her like crying. I'm not trying to make any judgments, but there's no tears. I'm just saying. Yeah, some look-alike. So here's that Amanita that they eat down there. Amanita principes. Look at it. Looks just like a death cap, man. Like, so, I don't know. I'm good. I'll pass on that one. Galerina marginata. This is a common one that grows all across the country and in Europe and stuff. They used to call it Galerina autumnalis, but the West Coast variety we call marginata because of the little remnants that get left here tabbered onto the margin of it. And it's a little brown mushroom that could be confused for certain psilocybe mushrooms. It grows on wood and wood chips, just like psilocybe cyanescens. So the Galerina marginata, I think it's just as important to know your deadly poisonous mushrooms as it is to know the ones that you're looking for. Because, yeah, you want to avoid these, but they're going to have this rusty brown spore print. A psilocybe mushroom has a dark purple-brown spore print, which isn't that far apart if you're a novice, you know what I mean? Like, so look for that gelatinous pellicle, look for the blue staining that's indicative of psilocybe if that's in fact what you're looking for, and the Galerina will have neither of those. And it contains the amatoxins, the same deadly compounds that are in the death cap, even though it's not related. So yeah, here's Galerina marginata growing on some wood. This is Psilocybe stuntsii growing on some wood chips. You can see how they might be confused with each other. So speaking of dyeing, you like that segue? You can dye fabrics, protein fabrics with mushrooms. All these are all yarn and stuff that was dyed with different types of dyers mushrooms. Dyer mushrooms often grow in the summer, and they're really easy to forage, and it gives you something to do when there's no good edibles out. You can just get nerdier and nerdier, you know. It's still like. So, here's a dyer's mushroom. This one's known as the dyer's polypore, Phaeolus schweinitziae, and it can look like kind of a pastry or something coming out of the ground. It often grows on old stumps, and if you just see it growing out of the ground, it's because it's growing on a dead root, and sometimes it can act parasitic, so it'll actually be growing on a live tree and eventually kill it. So if you have one of these growing in your yard and you're like, oh, how beautiful, right next to my beautiful fir tree, your fir tree might be on the way out. The lobster mushroom, Hypomyces lactiflorum. This is a super interesting mushroom. I forage these just about 5 minutes from my house. They're really bright orange. I have kids who love to go mushroom hunting because these ones are easy to find. So they all go, lobster mushrooms are our favorite because they're so bright, but they do hide under the moss, so it's like Easter egg hunting, really. But it's actually a weird symbiosis between two different mushrooms. There's one called the Russula brevipies around here, and then it gets parasitized by a secondary fungal component called Hypomyces lactiflorum, which will contort the mushroom, turn it orange, and make it into a really delectable, edible delicacy. And when they get a little bit past prime, then they can be used as a dyeing mushroom and make beautiful pink and magenta and purple tones. You can add different mordants to the water to affect the pH level. And I'm not a chemist or a dyer, but I've been in one of the workshops and it was super fascinating. But these are fun to find and fun to eat. Now, I'm not sure if the parasite is flying through the air and then lands on the fruiting bodies, because I found some that are like subterranean and they're already orange. I found some that are halfway parasitized, and I've also, you know, the lobster mushrooms come back in the same spot every year. It'd be kind of weird if it wasn't already present on the mycelium underground. That just makes it parasitized every year after year, you know. This one, Tapenilla atrotomentosa, or the velvet-footed pax. This is another dyer's mushroom. It's got a really fuzzy little foot on it. It also grows on logs, rotting wood. Pissolithus, the dead man's foot. This is growing right in between the gutter and the sidewalk outside my house, right in downtown. And this looks like a dog turd, but when you cut it open, it's got these amazing, just crazy patterns of the spores that grow inside it, and it kind of turns into a sort of a puffball, but it makes some really amazing colors. But you could just be walking by this every day and not notice that it was actually a mushroom. And they're mycorrhizal, so they grow with trees, and they come back in the same spot every year. I'll walk up to that garbage. It's actually my neighbor's garbage can, but I walk up over to his garbage can, and there it is, like every year after year, growing back in late summer. Oh yeah, they call it a dead man's foot too. So cordyceps, we've probably heard of cordyceps. There's that new show on HBO or whatever, The Last of Us, about people getting parasitized by some sort of a fungus. And this truly happens on insects. A fungi infects the insect, and the really interesting thing, some of them on ants, will basically put them into a trance. Some of these cordyceps actually contain psilocybin too, which is interesting, that they might actually get this ant so tripped out that it can brainwash it. And the ant climbs way up in a tree and then it bites onto the bottom of a leaf, and then that's when it dies and this mushroom pops out of the back of its head, and so its spores can fly off into the wind currents better. So it effectively takes control of the mind of the insect, and then it grows out of it. This is a larvae with a different one, Ophiocordyceps militaris, really popular medicinal mushroom. This is the most expensive mushroom in the world, known as Garza gunbu. Ophiocordyceps sinensis. This is as small as a little bigger than a matchstick, but $50,000 a pound for these because they're so small and supposedly really highly medicinal. This is one of my favorite topics, fairy rings. If you've ever walked out in a grassy field in western Washington or pretty much anywhere, you might have seen mushrooms growing in a ring-shaped formation. And there's like all kinds of old folklore. Please go to Mushroom Wonderland on YouTube and you can watch a special about that I did about fairy rings and all the different cultures. And some people thought they were where witches would hold seances at night and then the mushrooms pop up the next day. Other cultures believe that's where fairies dance at night. And if you happen to stumble upon the fairies while they're in their dance, that their song is so enchanting, it will pull you into the dance and you'll dance until you die. Or at least till time has elapsed to where when you finally get done with the dance, everybody you love will have already grown up and passed away. And the only way to get out of it is if a friend, you see this guy in desperation, get out of the dance. And what really is happening is the fungus started here, and as it's been growing outward, the outward radial tips of the hyphae will create the fruiting body. So there's some of these that are 800 years old and as big as a football field in like Cambridge in the UK and in France, really impressive ones of these amazing fairy rings. But I love the kind of magical thing, and if you watch my channel, you kind of will get that feel from the music and the vibe that I like, that enchanted forest feel, and I like the idea of like spookiness and the fairies and witches and all that kind of stuff. Ringworms are another example of like a fairy ring, really common among like wrestlers, and they will grow on your hands, and it's just it's a fungal infection in the skin, and it's actually eating your dead skin cells. And then the fruiting bodies are actually what you see spreading spores, highly contagious. Yeah. Over 40 types of fungus can cause ringworm. And gross. Athlete's foot. That's not an actual picture. If you have that going on, it's way worse than what I'm going to talk about. You're probably dead. Athlete's foot is caused by a number of different funguses, and it's actually the same types of fungus that cause ringworms. It's effectively the same thing. You just get antifungal creams and whatnot, so that's basically what athlete's foot is. Cheese is caused by fungus, so Penicillium camberdii or roquefortii. These are a couple of the different strains of penicillium that can make delicious cheese. A lot of cultures think that Western culture is super weird for eating a blue cheese like this, but if you've ever had Stilton blue cheese, that's grown with the Penicillium roquefortii, and when you cut into it, it'll ooze, and it's really green and fuzzy inside, but really expensive, and humans have been doing that for quite a while. Penicillium verrucosum, this is a grain contaminant. This is a type of penicillin that's actually very toxic, and so not all penicillin is good. And this one is toxic, and it really causes a lot of damage to grain. So, a common grain contaminant. Speaking of grain contaminants, the ergot fungus, parasitic rye fungus, Claviceps purpurea. This one is used to synthesize LSD. So, not only do psychedelic mushrooms, contain psychedelic compounds, but LSD also comes from fungus. It was first synthesized by Swiss chemist Albert Hoffman in 1938. This is an ergot fungus growing on some rye right there. And so they figured out you can't just eat that and have an acid trip. It goes through quite a process in the laboratory, but still interesting that all these psychedelics are coming from funguses. Wine and bread, been used forever. made out of fungi. So Saccharomyces cerevisiae, this one is just present in the air. So you can, you know, just crush up grapes, and it's just all around us. We're breathing it all the time. And so you can, you know, people in prison make pruno or wine out of just putting fruits and juice or water out in the open air, and this fungus will land on it. And essentially what it does to make the alcohol is that the yeast or the fungus will eat the sugars, because that's what fungus likes, is sugar and fat. And so it eats the sugars, and then its byproduct, its waste product, its poop, if you will, or pee, is alcohol. So you are drinking alcohol. Or poop. So Penicillium chrysogenum, this one, penicillin as we know it, as a, you know, probably the most revolutionary antibiotic ever. And it didn't come out really until the 1920s and wasn't really used until the 1940s successfully, but it's just totally revolutionized healthcare. So fungus has a major role, and if you can imagine, you know, each fruiting body will have over 1,000 different chemicals in it. We all know, maybe, hopefully we don't all know, I see some kids in here, but that psilocybin is a super powerful chemical in mushrooms, right? And penicillin, we just recently discovered this, so there's so much more that we could learn from mushrooms and what they hold. So microremediation, there was a good talk going on just earlier about that. This is the use of fungus to get pollutants and heavy metals and contaminants and purifying water through the means of fungus. And they can take myceliated grain and beans and then put it in bags and purify water. This is a Pleurotus ostriatus that I grew, and it can be grown on diesel-covered rags and cardboard and all kinds of things to help break it down, make it back into reusable material. And yeah. So, as humans, we are the protectors of the kingdom of Mushroom Wonderland. So, you know, he who has the most tools has the most responsibility. And mushrooms have been around for 450 million years. Humans not even a fraction of that, but we've come so far. So, if there's anybody who really needs to look over fungus and be responsible for the earth, I'd say that it is all of us who live in Mushroom Wonderland. And I want to thank you for attending the talk.